distinguished guests, dear rector, dear professors and students. It is our great pleasure to warmly welcome to this open forum on behalf of Epoka University, Politics and Diplomacy Club, Conflict Resolution Club and International Relations Club. We are very honored to have among us today Mr. Jonathan Cooper and Ms. Martha Spurrier, who will share with us their views about how international human rights standards should be interpreted and applied. Allow me to provide a short resume on the professional life of our first speaker, Mr. Jonathan Cooper. Mr. Cooper is a human rights specialist with experience before English and international courts and tribunals, as well as conducting training programs and advising on human rights issues in jurisdictions all over the world. In 2007, Mr. Cooper carried out a comprehensive human rights training program for judges and prosecutors in the Turkish military. From 2005 to 2011, Mr. Cooper was the chair of the Executive Committee of the Human Rights Lawyers Association. In 2011, he became Chief Executive on the Human Dignity Trust. Now, allow me to give the floor to Mr. Jonathan Cooper.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here to discuss this topic, which is looking at what is international human rights law? What relevance is it to you as the next generation of Albanians? How seriously should you take it? What is its role in your professional lives? How important are international human rights? We are obviously in a major international crisis at the moment. When we look at what's going on in Ukraine and Crimea and Russia, we should be asking ourselves, how are we going to resolve that? And one of the key tools in the resolution of the crisis that's currently engulfing all of Europe, and particularly the eastern parts of Europe, the crisis that is engulfing Europe will or should be seen through the lens of international human rights law, and what international human rights law offers by way of a solution, by way of a remedy. And it's very interesting if you kind of consider what it's all about. I don't want to get overly political about what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, but inevitably we will. On one level, of course, it's about opportunism on the part of the Russian government and Putin in particular, that he's taking an opportunity to seek to make certain moves that he's probably always wanted to make. But at the same time, there is another rather important debate about what's happening in Crimea, and it is that whole issue of self-determination. And self-determination we look at as the great right of the 20th century. It's the right that is there at the heart of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It's there at the heart of the International Covenant on Economic and Social rights, economic, social and cultural rights. But what do we mean by the right to self-determination? What does it mean in the context of international law and international relations? And I think because of what's happening in the world at this moment, I think it is important to take this opportunity that we're all here together to reflect upon what the right to self-determination means and should mean in the context of Crimea. Just by way of context, the very kind introduction that I've just been given identifies me as British. You may know that in the United Kingdom at the moment, we are going through our own exercise in the right to self-determination, as Scotland is pursuing, or parts of Scotland, or parts of the Scottish population are pursuing the idea of their own independence. And there is a vote on Scottish independence which will take place in September of this year. And so there is a chance that, that should you invite me back next year, or this time next year, and you introduce me, as I've just been introduced, as a lawyer from the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom this time next year might be considerably smaller than the United Kingdom that we currently have. And so it's very interesting, that question of self-determination. What does it mean? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I'm English, I am British, I am from the United Kingdom. Personally, I like Scotland being part of the United Kingdom, but then at the same time, if the Scottish people want independence and they're voting on it, having gone through a very lengthy consultation process, having engaged all key institutions of the state to go through that process to seek their own self-determination, if they opt to be independent, who am I to say? And so therefore that raises very, very interesting issues if you think of other minority issues around the world today. We are hosted in this remarkable institution of Epoka University. The roots of this wonderful university are Turkish. And in Turkey you have an incredibly rich culture, a rich, diverse culture that is sort of the embodiment of welcoming diversity. If you look back at the Ottoman Empire, it was an extraordinary feat of the embodiment of diversity. But how does that idea of diversity fit into modern Turkey in the 21st century, when you have another process possibly of self-determination taking place in the southeast of Turkey amongst the Kurdish people, when they're asking what's their relationship with the Turkish state? How should the Turkish state be accommodating them? And what is how do you exercise in the context of Turkey the self-determination rights of the Kurdish people? And so these are very, very complicated, they're very sensitive, they're emotionally very powerful questions. Another very good example of the United Kingdom is, of course, in the United Kingdom, we lived through a conflict within our borders for over 30 years in the context of Northern Ireland, where there were a large, albeit a minority, but a large minority of people who used violence in much the same way as the Kurdish people have used violence, or parts of the Kurdish people have used violence, to secure their own self-determination rights and needs. But before we look at self-determination, I really hope we can have a long discussion about that. I wonder if my presentation can be put on the board, on the screen. Great. Okay, I want to just spend a few moments just looking at this subject, how international human rights standards should be interpreted and applied. And I think we should, when we're looking at this question, how they should be interpreted and applied, we should be thinking of it in a 21st century context. And I think we should be thinking of it in light of what's happening across the globe, the role of human rights in providing peace and security, and also particular issues. And I think the focus should be on Russia and Ukraine and Crimea. I am principally going to lead this discussion. I'm here with my colleague, Martha Spurrier. We're both at this chambers. We're both barristers in London. And we're both in these chambers together. And I'm going to principally lead this, but Martha is probably going to chip in. She might not. She'll be asking questions like you guys. So, but I want this to be interactive. I don't want there just to be questions at the end, if that's all right. And so just to start, let's just ask this question. No doubt you ask it yourselves anyway, but you'll certainly be asking it in your classes that you're taking. I appreciate you're not necessarily going to come at this from a human rights law perspective, but what are human rights? What are they there for? Why do we have them? What's the point of them? Are they just an academic class that you attend? You might write an essay or two in your international relations class. What are they for? What do they do? Anyone want to have a go? Martha, what do they do? What are they?
Well, I might get this wrong, but they protect the rights and freedoms of all people, regardless of their nationality, their gender, their race, their sexual orientation, predominantly against any infringement against those rights by state bodies.
Okay. Would you agree with that distillation?
Totally wrong.
Yeah? Would you accept that definition of what human rights are, why we have them?
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
I believe they have to be set some internationally recognized standards, so that everybody agrees and everybody recognizes. So this is a separate set of rules, in a way, if you wish.
And what do those rules mean? Why do we have a separate set of rules?
Because we are a global community more and more, so we have to agree in certain things.
Well, so, yes.
This set of rules are written and are signed from different countries and different, there are many like peace treaties and stuff like that, in order to assure that people will will have freedom and democracy and stability in their own countries. And human rights are important not only in one country, but it's important also for the region. So it's important to have international human rights.
Okay. And I mean, I absolutely agree with that 100%. I also agree with Martha, and I do agree with you too. And I think what I was trying to push you to say is the reason why we need them to have these rules is that human rights trump. Do you know what I mean by that? It might be a very English colloquial thing, you know, a card game where my cards trump your cards, yeah? Do you know what I mean? So human rights as trumps. And the point is they are trumps, and therefore you're going to win by playing your human rights card if you play the correct human rights card, which I think Martha summed up, and this gentleman also talked about the importance of it. And therefore we have to be very careful with them, because not everything can be a human right if they're trumps. And so if we're talking about human rights as trumps and we're looking at it in the context of what's going on in Crimea at the moment, then we need to be very careful how we play the human rights trump. But I think human rights are about this concept in particular. They're about the inherent dignity of us all. They're a recognition, Martha was kind of getting at that, where it doesn't matter who you are, where you are. You could be a Roma person living here in Albania, you could be a suspected terrorist, you could be somebody who's committed pretty terrible crimes. Everyone, everywhere, we recognize that the human condition is one of human dignity. Now, it may be that you have to have parts of your rights lawfully taken away from you. If you've committed a particularly serious crime, you can be imprisoned as a consequence of that. But nobody takes away your dignity. You can't take away dignity and that fundamental notion of dignity. And then picking up on what this gentleman was saying, human rights are about accountability. Martha was also saying that. It's about how do you hold those that exercise power over people, how do you hold them to account? That's what human rights do. They hold the exercise of power to account. And so we're floundering with Crimea. You look at the G7, that was the G8, it's now the G7. They don't really know what to do with Putin. They don't really know how to hold him to account. And they're not, arguably, they're not then using one of the best tools that they have available to them, because they're not really using their human rights card. But to pick up on what the gentleman said at the back, I think what human rights do is they provide security. Show me a jurisdiction that doesn't respect human rights, that is a secure jurisdiction. You won't be able to. All jurisdictions, all countries that respect human rights are secure. So if you go back to the example I just gave of the United Kingdom in Northern Ireland, in the United Kingdom, the rights of the Northern Irish Catholics were being violated. There's no question they were being violated. and therefore that created an insecure situation which led to 30 years of conflict. The way in which that conflict was resolved was by applying human rights to everyone. And the point about human rights is that you can't be selective. You can't say, actually, I'm only going to apply the human rights to the people I like, and I only want the rights that I like to go to these types of people. They have to apply to everyone. And therefore, the Northern Ireland conflict, which you may be aware of, you're probably all too young to remember it. Are you familiar with the conflict that went on in the United Kingdom for 30 years? There was an extraordinary conflict that went on in, one of the oldest democracies in the world, where the United Kingdom, there are still, I think it's over 2,000 deaths that haven't been properly investigated, and that is in the United Kingdom. So in that environment, there was no human rights protection, and therefore you had no security. The same analogy would work in apartheid South Africa. Apartheid, one of the greatest crimes against humanity ever. It created an insecure environment in apartheid. How was the whole matter resolved? The matter was resolved through the application of human rights for everyone. And look at what happened when the United States and the British went into whatever they did in Iraq. They created a very insecure environment, the consequences of which were severe human rights violations. So I think when we ask ourselves what are human rights for, they have this almost spiritual notion of dignity. It's almost religious, isn't it? The idea that we recognize the quality of humanity in all of us and our dignity. So that's their kind of high moral purpose. But how do they do that? They do it by holding power to account. And it's a very clever mechanism by the way in which they hold power to account. But ultimately, with human rights, and I think you summed it up very clearly and succinctly, with human rights comes security at the local, regional, national, and then geographically regional levels, and universally, arguably, as well. So that is what human rights are for, and it's quite interesting. How long have we had them? If you go back to, apologies if I'm overdwelling on the Ottoman Empire, if you go back to the Ottoman Empire, there were notions of human rights in the Ottoman Empire. There were notions of human rights way back in 5,000 years ago in parts of India about holding the state to account. There were notions, one of the great kings of now present-day Iraq, or just outside present-day Baghdad, Hammurabi, he had sort of promulgated laws that were akin to human rights. But really, where do they come from? I think when we ask ourselves where do human rights come from, human rights are a very modern idea. And even though we have some sense that they began to emerge after the First World War, the trouble is, after the First World War, our focus was on minorities. It wasn't on human rights. And ultimately, it was that focus on minorities that then led Hitler to say, I'm just reuniting the German minorities, I'm just protecting the German minorities, which then ultimately led to the Second World War. But we do have notions of what we would call rights. We've got minority rights, we had children's rights, we had an international court, the idea that law would be a mechanism of peace, not war, with the International Court of Justice. But we didn't really have any notion of what we would now call human rights until after the Second World War, and we got the birth of what we would now consider to be the international human rights system. And we have there in the UN Charter, and it is worth kind of reflecting upon this, again picking up on your point, the role of the UN is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, and it is there to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small. So the UN Charter itself encapsulates that idea of what human rights do, which is they protect us ultimately from war and conflict. That you get this recognition of human rights being at the heart of the UN, but what are they? Still, nobody at this stage knows. You have American ideas of what human rights are, you have French ideas of what human rights are, the English have their own notion of what it thinks human rights are. As I've already alluded to, the Ottomans had historically had a commitment to equality and rooted its belief in human rights in equality. The different faiths, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, all had this recognition of human rights. But they hadn't really been encapsulated or tabulated. I'm going to skip the next two slides if I could. Until we got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so therefore, when you're asking yourselves, what are these human rights? What are these rules that we're going to be bound by? We find them there in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Is the UDHR familiar to you? You're all familiar with it, okay. So you have the Universal Declaration. As you know, it's just a declaration, although to all intents and purposes, it's considered to be binding now as a matter of custom. But it's been given legally binding force, as you all know, by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Economic and Social Rights Covenant. So we now have our rules, we have our International Bill of Rights, with these three documents all reinforcing each other, and that idea that civil and political rights and economic and social rights are indivisible. You can't just have one. The Americans are wrong. You can't just say human rights are just about no arbitrary detention and a right to a fair trial and the right to freedom of expression. You have to include the idea of an adequate standard of living, the ability for people to pursue the highest attainable standard of health. They are interlinked. You can't separate them. And so, obviously, under the old Albanian regime, communist regime, there was much more of a focus on economic and social rights and then ignoring civil and political rights, which was the kind of the way during the communist era post the Second World War. But it is just worth reminding ourselves of the other aspects of what's now in that International Bill of Rights, specific mechanisms to hold the state to account. So you can take the state to a committee at the UN and hold them to account. And it is worth remembering, are any of you familiar with what the first article of the ICCPR and the Economic and Social Rights Covenant says? Are you that familiar with those treaties? It's interesting, it's the right to self-determination. And both of them, they say, you have the right to self-determination. Now, the reality is, it's framed in that way to get at the British and the French, and in the old days, the Ottomans, because it's a way of getting at those colonial powers that had actually, in the pursuit of their own empires, denied the right of self-determination to, in the British case, India, large parts of Africa, and well, whatever, however big the British Empire was, and similarly, although the Ottoman Empire had already been dissolved at that point, the same principle would apply, that you have the right to self-determination. But what it wasn't very sophisticated, it was pretty easy on the obligation to decolonize. And as you'll know, the British sort of followed suit. In the 60s and 70s, the British abandoned their empire, quite rightly. But what they weren't particularly sophisticated about in the idea of self-determination is, what do you do about Northern Ireland? What do you do about the southeast of Turkey and the Kurds? What do you do in a modern day situation like Ukraine, Russia, and Crimea? What about, no doubt you will all have studied what's going on in Georgia and Abkhazia and South Ossetia. What happens there in the context of self-determination? How does that fit into international law and international relations? One thing you can't do, which is what Mr. Putin seems to have forgotten about, he obviously didn't attend your classes, you can't use force. That's not allowed when you're looking at that issue of self-determination and how you resolve it. But let's just go back to the UDHR and just have a look at the most important person, certainly the most important woman in my view of the 20th century. Eleanor Roosevelt. Without her, we would not have the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Without the UDHR, we would not have the international human rights framework that we are now feel that we have a common language. You're Albanian, I'm British, your rector is Turkish, we could have people from East Africa, we could have people from Crimea here, we could have people from Asia, we will all speak a common language of human rights thanks to this remarkable woman, and she is remarkable, and I think credit where credit is due. She managed, just as the Cold War was closing in and that Iron Curtain was about to come clunking down, she managed to get the UDHR through the United Nations. I mean, what an extraordinary achievement. And probably only Eleanor Roosevelt at that time could have done it. So we should probably all give her a round of applause. But let's let her do a little cartwheel instead. I don't know. Did you see that? Anyway, sorry, Eleanor, that must have, I think that's a bit disrespectful. Let's just spend a couple of minutes just reading out what Nelson Mandela said. I'm not trying to be overly hagiographic about this, but at the 50th anniversary of the UDHR, there's Nelson Mandela, relatively at that point recently released from prison. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, born in the aftermath of the defeat of the Nazi and fascist crimes against humanity, held high hope that all our societies would in future be built on the foundation of the glorious vision spelled out in each of its clauses. Have you read the UDHR? If you haven't, do. It'll take you 20 minutes. 26 clauses. It is sweet and perfectly formed. For those who had to fight for their emancipation, we had to free ourselves from the criminal apartheid system. The UDHR served as the vindication of the justice of our cause. For those of you who've read Nelson Mandela's autobiography, A Long Walk to Freedom, he reads the UDHR and realizes that it applies to him. And so interestingly, when Eleanor Roosevelt was getting all of those countries to agree it at the UN, there were a couple of states that didn't sign up to it. They didn't reject it, but they didn't sign up to it. One, of course, was apartheid South Africa. How could apartheid South Africa support the UDHR when it's just introduced this pernicious system of discrimination and persecution? At the same time, the UDHR constituted a challenge to us that our freedom, once achieved, should be dedicated to the implementation of the perspectives contained in the Declaration. So emancipation in and of itself isn't enough. You then have to be the living embodiment of the values of the UDHR. These slides are yours to use, so I won't read any more of it, but he goes on to say more wonderful and profound things about it. So when we're looking at Albania and Albania's relationship with international human rights law, I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but Albania is of course now a devoted member of the international community and has made, as evidence of its devotion to the international community, it has ratified all the key international human rights treaties. So Albania is saying, I want to be held to account, going back to the idea of how do we hold ourselves to account to get the dignity that human rights provide and the security that they provide. You do it through international human rights treaties, as our colleagues here said, and Albania has played a very responsible role. They have ratified all the key human rights treaties. So as we know, our International Bill of Rights, here, these, has been supplemented by specific treaties. One protecting against race, one protecting women against discrimination, one protecting against torture, those protecting children, those protecting migrant workers. For some reason I missed out disability. There's disability on there as well. And then there's this one, the Convention on Enforced Disappearances. Very interesting in the post-rendition age. the idea that we have a Convention on Enforced Disappearances. The United Kingdom hasn't ratified it. The United Kingdom cannot guarantee that we won't indict people, and that's why we haven't ratified that particular treaty. So that's a shocking indictment of the UK, that it doesn't feel it can ratify this particular human rights treaty because it can't be certain that it's not going to get caught up in the kind of renditions that have been going on, some of the ones that we're very familiar with post 9/11. So moving to the European framework that promotes and protects human rights, and we'll look at Albania's relationship with this as well in a moment. I'm sure this is all familiar to you, but maybe it's helpful to go back over it. We know that there are these three institutions that are supposed to protect human rights within Europe. This one we can sort of put to one side, I suppose, on one level, although the EU plays a very key role. But these two are very interesting, the Council of Europe and the OSCE. Do you pose yourself this question in your international relations classes? What is the point of the OSCE? What is the point of the OSCE? I think the last 3 weeks have shown that the OSCE may have no point. Sir?
To collect, to put all the countries together against a common threat, and to solve some conflicts or problems by being all together and participating in solving of that problem. Because not being okay with one, for example, like the case in Crimea and Russia, not being okay with it, it's not the solution. You need to take actions against, and in order to do that, in order to be effective, you need to be together.
You use some very important words in order to be effective. If you think of the recent conflicts in Europe, Georgia and Russia, both members of the OSCE, Russia and Ukraine and Crimea, all members of the OSCE, how effective have they been?
Not effective, because
Not effective.
I mean, they could have been more effective, but I don't think they were all at the same. They didn't find a common way to deal with the situation, or it was very hard because of a lot of important factors, like the economic crisis that Europe is going on, and a lot of other factors. Also because most of European countries are they need Russian resources.
Yeah.
And they need Russian energy and gas.
Germany being the obvious example. You know, German diplomats saying, well, we'll do anything, yes, to uphold human rights, unless there's an economic impact on us. You know, sorry to stereotype the Germans, a typical German approach. But it is quite interesting. I don't know how, you know, obviously on a level I agree with you that we need the OSCE because we need to have that broader European agency that only focuses on security, which stretches all the way over to the Stans of Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, there'll be 3 others that I can't remember, and then also includes the United States and Canada. It's important that we have that, but arguably, why don't we just need this? Why don't we just need the Council of Europe? And if the OSCE is failing, which it is, why have it? I mean, I'm not going to dwell on that point unless you want to, but interestingly, from a British, Albanian, Turkish point of view, what's the OSCE ever done for us? I think we can say what the Council of Europe has done for us, but what has the OSCE done for us? It is, you know, it's interesting, yet it's there, sort of devouring resources and taking up talking time. But anyway, I'm not going to say more than that as you want to.
Common defense is always difficult for Europe. Common defense, it's always difficult for Europe. And
Yeah.
also we are waiting.
But, I mean, I think that when we look at the Council of Europe, here, this one, this red one, when we look at the Council of Europe, I think they have been very good at maintaining peace and security and stability in Europe. And then you get big questions, really, really big questions. Should Russia be a member of the Council of Europe? Who is, can I say a rude, kind of colloquial sign, who is screwing the Council of Europe? Russia. Wouldn't the Council of Europe be far more effective without Russia?
Well, that has always been the problem, actually. It's not that we do not have laws, we do not have implementation in the global arena, in international arena.
But we do, though, don't we, within the Council of Europe? Exactly. What can they do? They can pass. What do they call their things? What are their documents that they have? I don't remember what they call. They've got some kind of meaningless name. They're not a binding treaty. They're they're kind of things that they believe in, or they might believe, or But it's a very interesting question. What are they for?
Is it worth to say that keep your friends closer and your enemies closer? Still,
Yeah.
enemies is a hostile word.
Yeah, I mean, although, I mean, watching Crimea unravel, it's when the OSCE took charge of Ukraine, or Kiev, and the process in Kiev, that the shooting started. It was interesting. It was when the OSCE took over that the shooting started, and the 18 or the 20 were murdered. But, of course, and I think it would be a foolhardy move to get rid of them. But it is interesting from our point of view, if you just take the northwest of Europe, Turkey in the southeast of Europe, Albania in the sort of third of the way up, what has the OSCE ever done for us? Whereas I think we can say what the Council of Europe has done. Anyway, that's a kind of mechanism that I've tried to sort of, how do we protect human rights within Europe? Obviously the UN plays a role, then we have the OSCE, the Council of Europe, and the EU, and I hope at one point I'm a fan of human rights compliant states being members of the Council of Europe. So I look forward to Albania being a fully compliant human rights state and joining the European Union. Joining the European Union. So do you think, so if we look at the Council of Europe for a moment, as you may know, it was very much Winston Churchill's vision of a United States of Europe immediately after the Second World War. It became a key part of the Cold War. These were the states that first bought into it. It was pretty much a UK-inspired movement. Obviously, we wanted, it was that idea of how Europe could all work together, a mini UN for Europe. But as we know now, there are now 47 member states, and it is a pretty extraordinary setup, stretching all the way to the Pacific coast in Russia, to the most western part of Europe. I'm never sure what the most western part of Europe is. Iceland, Portugal, Ireland. Nobody knows what the most western part of Europe is. And the most southern part would, I think, be Cyprus. And then that hodgepodge of jurisdictions in the middle. So you've got a little baby country like Albania with 3 million people, and then you've got a country like the United Kingdom with 60 million people. Maybe the United Kingdom will end here soon when we leave Scotland. Build a little canal, push it off. You've got predominantly Muslim countries like Turkey, you've got predominantly Catholic countries like Poland, you've got countries that feel pretty secular like the Netherlands, lots of different income brackets, lots of different value systems, all coming up together under the auspices of the Council of Europe. It's sort of basically underpinned by these treaties. The most important one really is the European Convention on Human Rights. But this is an extraordinary treaty as well. Have you done much work on the Convention for the Prevention of Torture in Europe? It's very interesting, very, very interesting, and actually did some brilliant and beautiful work in Turkey. Turkey now has a world-class prison service. One of the reasons why they have a world-class prison service is they worked very closely with the Committee for the Prevention of Torture. That one. to develop a much better way of running a prison service. But our main concern is the Convention on Human Rights, but also you have this enforcement, the gentleman here who talked about enforcement. Ultimately, there is that kind of political role of the Committee of Ministers to ensure that there is some political process in the enforcement of human rights. So when we're looking at the European Convention on Human Rights and its court, the European Court of Human Rights, it's not just that the court finds violations. There is the Committee of Ministers backing it up by holding states, prompting states, and making states give effect to those judgments. And from an international relations point of view, I think one of the most interesting judgments ever was a case against Turkey involving northern Cyprus, where the impasse of northern Cyprus had been running for decades. Cyprus had brought a case against Turkey in the European Court of Human Rights. That's true, and the European Court of Human Rights had found that Turkey had violated key. The European Court of Human Rights had found that Turkey had violated key provisions of the European Convention, but the impasse remained. But then what happened? Mrs. Loiseau, who had been resident in the north of Cyprus, who had property in the north of Cyprus, she petitioned the European Court of Human Rights. She said, you know something, I want my house back. If I can't have my house back, I want money for it. And all of a sudden, and the European Court of Human Rights agreed with her, and then all of a sudden, there was decades of international relations and international diplomacy suddenly at the whim of a woman who wanted her house back. And it transformed everything. As a consequence of that judgment of the European Court of Human Rights against Turkey, the Turks had to create a system of compensation, which they did, and the European Court of Human Rights looked at that system of compensation and found it to be human rights compliant. And so you got a resolution. And the very, very interesting thing about the Loiseau case is you get a resolution through law, not diplomacy. And I've always wondered what diplomats think about the fact that almost they had the rug pulled from under their feet because of what Mrs. Loiseau did at the European Court of Human Rights. But what we found, if you look at the European Court and the European Convention on Human Rights, is it's just played an incredibly important role, in providing peace and security. And you take the two hot spots that were central to the problems of Europe, Northern Ireland and the southeast of Turkey, and what we find by looking at both of those is that the Strasbourg Court and the European Convention on Human Rights played a fundamental role in bringing these issues to the fore and making or requiring that there be a human rights compliant approach to dealing with both. I appreciate issues in the southeast of Turkey aren't yet resolved, and the issues in Northern Ireland probably, certainly in terms of the use of force, probably are resolved, but I don't know if any of you have ever been to Northern Ireland. You should probably go, actually. Maybe you should get a class to go, because you would think if you went there that nothing had been resolved. There are still walls, literally walls, that separate the Catholics on the one side and the Protestants on the other. But there is no violence. But has there been a resolution? I'm not so sure about that, but there is no violence. And I think we're getting there in the southeast of Turkey, and human rights are key to that process. But let's just have a look at what's been going on in Strasbourg and look at the violations. And I think we get a lot of very, very interesting issues here. Now you have to remember that Russia and Ukraine are very recent members of the Council of Europe. Turkey and Italy are obviously, I think Turkey joined the Council of Europe and ratified the European Convention in 1953 or something. and ratify the right of individual petition in the early 90s or late 80s, which is relevant. So we see that Turkey has a large number of human rights violations against it, and they principally stem from the southeast of Turkey, and problems arising out of the southeast. You know, outside of that context, and Cyprus, outside of that context, you know, you are going to get a fair trial in Turkey. You are going to have your Why isn't
Serbia?
I'll come to Serbia in a minute. You'll see Serbia in a minute.
Because I think the most violations from the 1960s in Serbia.
Yeah, but Serbia wasn't. You have to ratify the right of individual petition, and so France, for example, ratified the right of individual petition. You know, the kind of the cradle of human rights. They didn't want themselves to be held accountable under the European Convention of Human Rights, because they didn't want their system to be challenged by an outside court. But it wasn't until Mitterrand that France committed the right of individual petitions to the court, which was about the same time that Turkey went to the court. The reason why there are so many violations against Italy, anybody know why there are so many violations against Italy?
Late implementation.
No. It's part of it, but it's not the main one. It's delays in fair trial. Their court processes are ridiculously lengthy, literally decades. It takes decades and decades to get, you know, you trip up outside the Uffizi in Florence and you're going to be suing the Florence Municipal Council literally for decades. So, so it's a pretty odd anomaly to Italy, but you know, it's there. And then we've got the others there, the 52% of the others. Now, the United Kingdom used to have a particularly unique record in Strasbourg, that the United Kingdom had violated all the rights in the convention, except for the right prohibiting slavery, and that was unique. But then what the United Kingdom did in 2000 was make the European Convention on Human Rights part of English law. And as a consequence of doing that, and again, very interesting from an international relations perspective or a politics perspective or a government perspective, once the United Kingdom had made the convention part of its law, there are now no longer very, very few cases against the United Kingdom now in Strasbourg. And that's so once you make it a binding part of your law, the case is stopped, or they stopped in the United Kingdom. So that is the situation as of taking into account the whole history of the European Court of Human Rights from 1959 to 2013. So if we look at the violations by country in 2013, and we have to remember that Turkey has still got a lot of cases in the system from when the problems in the southeast of Turkey were so acute. So that explains that rather high number there. But we see that Russia, which only very recently ratified the right of individual petition, has large numbers of cases against it. And then I think we also have this disturbing issue of Romania with that number of cases against it, particularly in the context of Romania being a member of the European Union. So that's the number of violations just last year. That's what the situation was. And then if we look at the subject matter of the violations, it's pretty shocking what they are. You know, people not getting a fair trial, then proceedings, so these are all Italy. Not all Italy, but a lot of them are Italy. This is far too high. There's that level of torture going on in Europe. It's really shocking. Property issues, a big issue I know here for you in Liberia, and unlawful detention. So that's how it breaks down across the board. And as we know, you know, Turkey, for its own aberrations in that period in the southeast, contributes a lot to this and this and this. But so when you now look at pending cases before the European Court of Human Rights, we suddenly see that actually there are cases against Turkey, but Turkey is no longer the dominant problem in the Strasbourg court. And we see that the dominant problem is still Russia. And there you have Serbia. So you see that Serbia is a hotspot. Serbia is a hotspot. They're not respecting human rights. What you don't see here, of course, is Albania, because it's just too small statistically. And why, you might want to ask, is the United Kingdom there? The reason why the United Kingdom figures is because the United Kingdom has made the European Convention of Human Rights part of its domestic law. Part of that process is you then petition Strasbourg. It's the part of that process. So there are cases pending against the United Kingdom, but now you find very, very, very few violations. So these are cases, states that have sent more than 1,000. Again, the reason of this is the southeast of Turkey, and these are delays to fair trial. But again, you're getting a picture of a pattern of problems or problem countries. And so when you now look at this statistic, so this figure in relation to the United Kingdom of 59% is principally that period up to 2000 when the United Kingdom hadn't made the European Convention part of its law, didn't have proper human rights protection. But since then, very few cases are found against the United Kingdom. A shocking figure in Russia, 93%. Italy with its delays, and then France also has a pretty high figure. 73% of French cases are found to violate the convention. And again, we see Turkey with 88%, but that figure is dropping. Turkey, picking up on what the United Kingdom had done, has now made the European Convention on Human Rights part of its law, or for the last about just under a decade. So when we look at Albania, we see that 76% of all cases against Albania, there has been a violation. So it's up there with sort of France, if you go back to that. So it's like France and Italy. And then these are the violations that there have been. There haven't been that many cases, you can have them up. Again, it's been less than 100 violations against. So the predominantly have been fair trial issues. Because of your complicated property laws, there have been property violations, no effective remedy, and then there's been one violation, torture, one on inhuman and degrading treatment, one on arbitrary detention, length of proceedings, and then only one, although I think it's two, somebody told me there's 2 cases on privacy against Albania. So those are the issues that are coming up in Albania, but if you look at them, there are very few cases, aren't there? If you compare it to what we've just looked at with those other jurisdictions. So, how do we bring these international human rights standards to life? I think we should discuss some of the issues that I've raised, and if there's time, I'll go back over how you actually bring them to life, but maybe those issues will come out in discussion. So does anybody have any questions that they want to raise now about what I've said, Albania's record, other European countries' record? Is the European Court of Human Rights effective? Does Russia care that it's found to have violated the European Convention so often? Do they care? They just compensate. You will be compensated. But at least the people in Chechnya have at least got the remedy of the Strasbourg Court. If Russia wasn't a member of the Council of Europe, wasn't a signatory to the European Convention, they wouldn't even have that. So at least there's that. But it is very interesting, you know, the difference in approach to the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, Turkey in the southeast, and Russia and Chechnya. You know, the United Kingdom and Turkey recognized the problem and went out of their way to deal with the problem and address it. It took Turkey a bit of time to do that, but once it realized that there was a real problem, they went out of their way to address it. Russia's done nothing. They just compensate. You'll be compensated if your rights are violated, but that's all they'll do. They won't do what Turkey has done and what the United Kingdom has done to try to address the systemic problems that led to the violations in the first place. So thoughts on what I've been saying today, including from you, Martha?
wonder if it is helpful to give some examples of how it works out in practice.
Or how rights actually work.
Yeah, I mean, I could just give a couple of examples from my practice in the UK, which is to show that this umbrella framework, which is legal and also obviously political, and lots of your work will be around international relations, but how it filters down into people's everyday lives. And that's what Eleanor Roosevelt thought human rights were all about. She said they started in small places. And maybe if I just give 3 examples which would apply in Albania, they would apply anywhere. One area where they've made an enormous difference, and it's something I do a lot of work on, is policing. So, for example, we know from there was a recent report on domestic violence in Europe, we know that 1 in 3 women will at some point in their lives be the victims of domestic violence. In the UK now, because of the Human Rights Act, which is our implementation of the European Convention, there is a positive duty on the police to investigate all claims of domestic violence and all claims of rape made by women. And it's a very strong duty. We've had a number of cases finding that where the police make basic mistakes, they don't follow up lines of inquiry, they don't take women seriously, they don't believe women, or they believe men over women. The police officers in those cases have been found to violate those women's human rights, and it's made a huge difference. Historically, there was no way of holding the police to account in those cases. Another area in the UK has been that of health and care. We've recently had a number of scandals whereby the care of elderly people and very mentally disabled people has been shown to be absolutely horrendous. So they're locked away in care homes where there's very little scrutiny from the outside world, and they are, in some cases, egregiously abused by their carers, sexually, physically, mentally. And again, recently this all got brought to light, and human rights has given the victims and their families a mechanism to hold the carers to account and to then put in place frameworks and training to stop this from ever happening again. And a third area, again, which touches on my work, relates to the rights of families to stay together. And again, I'm not sure you can tell me more about what happens with immigration in Albania, but immigration is a very sensitive political topic in the UK, particularly at the moment. And one thing that happens a lot is that the UK government tries to deport people who have set up families and a family life in the UK. And it's only the Human Rights Act that's enabled us to be able to make arguments to say parents should not be separated from children, couples should not be separated. And that, again, is something, it simply didn't exist in our law before. And so those are just 3 areas that show that really for individual citizens of any state, they can invoke human rights, whether it's health, policing, social care, whether it's the state holding their data for too long, or the state refusing to recognise that they have got a civil partnership with someone of the same sex, or that they've changed gender. All of those issues that really go to the core of anyone's identity, those have been helped and progressed by human rights in a way that no other legal framework has really addressed them.
So,
I was thinking, when you asked the first question, what are the human rights, there was something written, inalienable, indivisible, and one of them was universal. So I was thinking while you were speaking, like when you meant the right of self-determination. And I was going, who promoted self-determination? It was United States statements. And we all know the interest behind self-determination right that was promoted by the United States, because it was the only country and superpower that didn't have colonies. I don't believe that this one is a coincidence. Or it may be. The other one, later we go there.
you make a really good point. Have you heard of something called the Atlantic Charter? It was this document that Roosevelt's eldest husband, FDR, and Winston Churchill's committed to in 1943, and it was how the British could persuade the Americans to join in the war on the British side. And effectively, it's really worth looking at this document, because effectively what Churchill did is he gave up the British Empire, because the Americans wanted access to the markets of the British colonies, and therefore, if that would get America in the war, Churchill was prepared to do that. So, in fact, Churchill was the person that kind of dismembered. I mean, obviously he was to go.
It was one of the points.
The British Empire in order to persuade the Americans to step in, and the Americans were just saying, right, we can now get these as our market. So it's no coincidence that the British gave up their empire and the World Trade Organization was set up at the same time. So, and the Americans were the beneficiaries of that process. So you make an astute point, I think, sir.
Okay. But, later we go with human rights and who is promoting human rights.
Do you want to use the microphone?
No, actually I can.
Okay, I just wonder if everyone.
I am young, but I can speak. I can be much louder. Now, mostly human rights are being promoted by the Western world, European Union and United States. Also, these states are the superpowers and are trying to keep the status quo. There are a lot of arguments that pretend it's kind of conspiracy, and I would like to ask you that, or can we like think of this one that maybe the same thing is happening again, that Europe and the United States are using human rights just in order to keep the status quo and wider the area of influence?
Well, I think it goes back to
also, while we were speaking for Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there were a bunch of states that make this one universal, because it's also about values and...
Well, I mean, the point about the UDHR is every single country that's since joined the United Nations has bought into it. They don't have to. You don't have to join the UN. Well,
I am from Kosovo, and you know that I have to join the UN. You can change it even if I don't like, even if Kosovo authorities won't like whatever it's written there, you have to join the United Nations. So sometimes you have to sign it.
Let me just... I'm just going to... So, I mean, these are the rights in the universal, in the European Convention on Human Rights. Okay, I mean, there are additional ones, but what there is not universal. What is it if you're from Myanmar, Burma, that you don't have the right to life? What is it if you're from Kosovo that you don't have the right to a fair hearing? What is it if and so when you actually look at what these civil and political rights are all about, they are so minimal what they're actually saying. What is it that means that you don't have the right to manifest your religion and belief if you're from South Africa?
Comment on the cultural relativism on human rights issues. That need to be taken into consideration too.
But I think the point is that what of these would you consider to be relative values rather than universal values? Because you have to separate it out. I take your point.
Well, freedom of expression, for example, looks like very much universal, but it's relatives. When you've got Eastern countries, when you look at the Eastern families, it's very much relatives. You cannot speak against your parents.
But the question is whether we think these are the right values that people should aspire to. You can either say there's a relativist...
You can marry and the found of family, okay? For example, that's relative too.
But when you say marry and found family...
You know, how you put the gay marriage on Catholic society?
Well, the gay marriage issue goes to an equality issue as well. We haven't actually got Article 14 on that. But the point is, you will always have a relativist approach, and you will always need to have some kind of universal values. Otherwise, you will just have to say, well, we can't have any values that unite the states.
You mean that we're going to set off the cultural relativism for the sake of universalism?
No, because the point is then how you implement these rights. So you don't implement them bluntly. And I completely take the point that there are a number of occasions in history, and recent history in particular, where the name of human rights has been misused by governments who want to get their own way, and they say there's a human rights basis for doing it, and there is clearly another alternative agenda. But the point is that if you believe that people have a right, every person has a right to basic standards, then you might want to sign up to these lists of rights. they will be implemented differently in every single country. So in the UK, we would approach the right to family life differently from the way that it will be approached in Albania, differently from how it will be approached in India.
Recently, the Prime Minister of the UK, he said that we are now tied of the European Court of Human Rights, instead of we are going to make our own human rights law.
Well, the United Kingdom has made it clear that they're not going to withdraw from the
Yes,
European
but
Commission.
your Prime Minister said that he's going to change he's going to have a British human rights law instead of applying or relying on the European Court of Human Rights.
But that, I mean, his view is that some elements of human rights have not been interpreted in a way that he
That's
likes.
clearly a relative view.
It is a relative view.
That's a good point we try to make.
But the point, he's taking a more relative view, and what we say in response to that is, it is not the job of governments and states to decide which human rights they like and which human rights they don't like, because that way lies disaster, that way lies the Second World War. I can't say, if I was your Prime Minister, I can't say, well, I'm a big fan of all your family lives, and I believe you should be allowed to practice whatever religion you like, but I don't really like men, so I'm not going to allow you to have access to employment.
You know, there's a practice in Turkey currently. Turkish Prime Minister, the laws of things, they change the law. And people just watching him and not following him.
Of course, because in a democratic society,
Is it?
where you have parliamentary sovereignty, you will have executive bodies being able to make changes. The point of human rights is to give a backdrop value system which is enforceable.
Which hermetically seals certain conduct, certain behaviour, certain values, and it seals them away from the political process. So you raise this. Why is the right to marry and found a family a human right?
Sorry.
Are you answering that question or another one?
No, I really...
Can we just deal with that? Why is the right to marry and found a family a human right?
But I think in here,
But can I just ask them,
it's a right, but now today, the right today, I ask questions, okay? Today, for example, laws of Eastern societies, or Middle Eastern societies, including Albania and Turkey, the Balkan societies, for example, now, some countries, they allow the gay and lesbian marriage to have families.
But why is the right to marry and found a family a human right? Why is it a human right? Why is it there in these post-war documents?
Because of the tradition, because of the moral value.
No, it's because of apartheid South Africa, where the state told you who you couldn't marry and who you had to marry. It's Nazi Germany, where the state said you can't marry that person, and if you do, you commit a criminal offence. And it's about the United States and the civil rights movement that said white people can't marry black people. And that's why the right to marry and found a family is so essential. And to be honest, forget gay marriage. I mean, it's so small and irrelevant. And to be honest, when the European Court of Human Rights looked at it, they said there was no right to gay marriage. So, I mean, that court has said there is no right to gay marriage. I think probably you can't be discriminated against if you are gay in relation to the benefits of marriage, i.e. pensions, what are the other benefits, you know, property, those types of things. But there's no right to gay marriage. And the European Court of Human Rights has said that. There's no any case against Austria 2 years ago. There's no right to gay marriage. But it's actually fundamental. The cruelest thing.
There is no right, and although the laws of member of European countries have passed the legislation about gay marriage.
Yeah, but it's not a human rights issue. It's a political value that they want to kind of endorse and uphold. What you can't do is say to gay people, we're going to criminalise you if you have sex with another person of the same sex in the privacy of your own home. We're not going to say you're a criminal because you're doing that. That's all human rights has really had to say about gay and lesbian rights, that you can't criminalise people simply because they have had or want to have sex with a person of their same sex in the privacy of their own home. That's all it says. It doesn't say anything else. So we can often inflate these issues and inflame them, which means that we don't actually address the fundamentals of it. And we can see, going back to what Nelson Mandela said about why the UDHR was so important, about how minimal these are. These are minimum standards. You know, what on earth were the British doing in Northern Ireland, hooding and torturing suspected IRA terrorists. What on earth were the Turks doing this exactly the same thing in the southeast of Turkey with people of Kurdish origin? And so that's why we need the universality of this. And we all know what torture is. We all know that what the British were doing was torture, and we all know what the Turks were doing was torture, and we know what the Russians are currently doing is torture. And so it is quite interesting. What about this is not universal? You know, you're being tried for an offence. It's pretty essential if you're in the dock that the judge is independent and impartial. Because otherwise, you're going down, if you know what I mean by that saying. You know, and so these are basic fundamental principles. You know, where does that notion of independence and impartiality come from? Probably from Islam, and the idea that the ultimate people who are to interpret Sharia law have to be independent and impartial. It probably does come from there, if we were going to search in the annals of where these things find their origins and their roots. What is there about, you know, there was a recent survey done in Mozambique, and women were asked what human right was the most important to them. And what do you think they said? Poor women in Mozambique. What was the most important human right? Privacy. They wanted to be able to wash and do private things without. They just wanted to have that moment of private space that they didn't get. Any of you been to South Africa? If you go to Cape Town, you take the motorway into the town, you know, this city which has got some of the most expensive properties in the world, you go by a slum. It's huge. It's 5 times bigger than Tirana, probably 10 times bigger than Tirana. And as you're driving along, there's no water in these houses. There are hand pipes so people get water. And you see, and the indignity of this, you see people washing. Obviously they do their best to preserve their modesty and their dignity, but they have no privacy. They can't wash in a private space, in a private place. So what is there about privacy that's not universal? What is there about, and obviously if the exercise of your religious freedom is to deny somebody else's religious freedom, then we can curtail your religious freedom. But if you are exercising your religious freedom, and by exercising that religious freedom, others can exercise their religious freedom, then we protect your right to manifest your religion and belief. The perfect example of that was the Ottoman Empire. They did it beautifully. Everyone could practice their faith and their beliefs. Same with freedom of expression, same with protest and setting up political parties. It is quite interesting. What about them isn't universal? If you really just look at the basics, of course, how the United Kingdom does things is different to how things are done in other jurisdictions. Of course it is. But the fundamentals don't change. And the fundamentals about what David Cameron is doing, or why he's so critical of human rights, is, just to make it sort of directly relevant, is he does not want Albanians coming to London and marrying British people and getting a right to be in Britain. That's why he wants to change the way human rights work, and that's the only reason why he wants to change the way human rights work, because he doesn't want people that he thinks he doesn't want getting a right to be in the United Kingdom, because they probably love, and I'm going to believe the people love each other. They love each other and they want to stay together. They want to stay together in the United Kingdom. Even if one of them happens to be Albanian, they must be allowed to stay together, which is part of their family life. And so, yeah, sir, you had a question.
Why they are, and I was trying to give arguments why they are not. Also, it is very difficult. I believe that human rights are universal, but to give arguments and to show it is a bit difficult. And the part is that you said that there are a lot of cases when states use human rights for national interest. I think that the human rights activists should do more to denounce. And if there are any cases, I would love to hear. Also, that part that you mentioned for gay marriage. You said that they are very small, but like this is the part that some states that have the money and are more powerful are able to direct and to like know which one to promote more or which one to promote less. And this is the part that relativism is.
But I don't see states promoting gay marriage. Gay marriage is
They should just give the funds. For example,
but not for gay marriage. It doesn't go for gay marriage. It goes to protect gay people from being criminalised.
they are taking the funds from somewhere.
But not for gay marriage. And I think that we then.
To promote the right for the to promote the right.
But I mean, you know, the United Kingdom, the gay marriage laws come into force this Saturday. Yeah, so on Saturday you can get married. You're gay.
Yes.
So, but that would not be anything that the British government then wants to, would want to impose on any other jurisdiction. It just wouldn't trigger. I mean, it's not actually a human rights issue. The reason why we have gay marriage isn't because it's a human rights issue. I mean, it is an equality issue, maybe, but it's not because it's a human rights issue that we have gay marriage. We have gay marriage because going back to very conservative ideas of how you make societies function better. In David Cameron's view, societies function better if everyone can get married. And therefore, he thinks that means that gay people should be able to get married. And if society is functioning better, society is richer. And therefore, it's a more prosperous, and therefore he says the reason why he supports gay marriage is because he's a conservative. Not despite the fact that he's a conservative, but because he's a conservative. But yeah, that's David Cameron's political view. It's not a human rights issue. You're looking, you're standing there, perching.
No, actually, we have a bus departing to the city.
Okay.
Quarter past 5, and most of the students use the public
Fine.
transportation.
No. Okay, sure. Understood. Any last points? Any last things people want to raise?
Yeah, I have a last question. Before starting your presentation, you were stating that bring international human rights to life, right?
Yeah.
So with these wordings, you are saying that until now we have not had any international human rights, or they have never been born?
Well, I don't think we've had international human rights until we had the Universal Declaration. That's true. But my point about how do we bring them to life is pretty much what Martha was saying. How do you give meaning to it? How are you, the next generation of Albanians, going to give meaning to Albania's human rights obligations? You know, to be honest, if I was going to be sort of a bit avuncular with you, I would say, you know, there's a lot to be done in Albania, and you should be thinking about litigating, for those of you who want to be lawyers, litigating human rights law and litigating it here and in Strasbourg. And if it's true that with increased human rights protection comes increased prosperity and security, and I think it is true, then by doing that, you're going to make Albania a more human rights compliant society, a richer society, and therefore, obviously people don't do this for self-interest, you'll be richer. Madam, last question.
Coming back to what should be an example of violation of human rights in UK, I want to give 2 examples in Albania. As you said about policing, in Albania there is this mentality that women, even if they are domestically abused, they won't go to the police and report it, and that's a huge problem which would start promoting the freedom of speech to these women that don't feel the freedom to give the information. And to the immigration, because in Ashana talking about this actually, we have I heard on the news of a child that the Egyptian is married to
family here and they're here, but stay for 12 years or more, is not given the citizenship to him. And he goes coming back from from Egypt to Albania, back and forth, and so this is also a violation of human rights. There are so many much more. For example, the usually we have minority of Rome. So many much more that we actually need to work on them, not just the government.
I agree.
Okay, so we thank you all for participating in today's open forum, and we hope you have enjoyed this. Looking forward to meet each other again, and have a nice day. Thank you very much.